Hi, this is Evelyn Lopez. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911.com podcast for the week of February 18, 2019. We are recording at the very wintry and snowy Moonyard recording studio in Tacoma, Washington. And today we are on topic because we are going to talk about the Green New Deal. What's been proposed and what is the buzz all about? Now, as we've discussed in past episodes, our climate is changing more rapidly than previously expected, and everyone has a stake in helping to slow that change. So that's what we're talking about. So welcome, everyone. Mitch Ratcliffe, our Earth911 publisher, where are you today?
Well, I'm snowed in part of outside Tacoma, Washington. We are learning that the state of Washington is unprepared for more than 5 inches of snow.
Right. Well,
we've been locked down for about a week now.
Yeah. Are you having a pretty good melt, or do you still have a lot of slush and snow on your roads?
Well, it's out here. It's been freezing rain, so we have a lot of slush and ice in the road. So it's actually very difficult to drive once you get off of Main Street.
Nice.
And
we also have.
We don't have the tow truck and salting truck fleets that many other cities do, which is why this is happening.
True. Well, we're also joined by Earth911 writers Sarah Lozanova and Trey Granger. Sarah, how are things in Maine today?
We had a snowstorm as well, so we're kind of snowed in and enjoying it.
That's good. So your kids are home?
Yeah, they're home. They're making forts, and we have a great fleet of snow plows, so we're actually in pretty good shape. That's
good. And Trey, how are things for you?
I'm wearing long sleeves, but it's definitely not snowing. It's probably 65 degrees.
Long sleeves and 65 degrees?
We get cold when it goes below 80 here.
Chilly.
Yeah, you get acclimated. Yeah, well, I'm coming in recording from home myself. I'm sitting on the bed with 2 doggies who hopefully will be well behaved. And it's snowing in Tacoma. We had a large snowfall all at once, and that just ends everything. So every time this happens, what I see on Facebook is people saying, well, what happened to global warming? How come it's so snowy? And I guess just as a public service announcement, I have to say, this is why we started talking about climate change. It's not necessarily going to get warmer everywhere, but it is going to get more and more unpredictable, more extreme. And we're going to see weather that we haven't seen. In our case, we haven't seen storms like this in 70 years.
Well, and today, for instance, we're nearing the high of the day, and it's about 36, 37 degrees, which is the average low in February. The average high is 51. So we're seeing some real changes in terms of, we talked about this earlier in the year, when spring arrives in the Northwest. We're 6 weeks from spring, and it looks like the snow might stay on the ground for another week and a half. So this is a very unusual thing. And it's because we're pushing the atmospheric flows in new directions. And we've seen that with the polar vortex moving south, which affected the Midwest and the East over the last couple of weeks with extreme low temperatures, down 30 and 40 degrees below zero. But here in the Northwest, we get a lot more concentrated extreme weather, and you can see it very clearly when this happens.
Interesting times. So, Mitch, what kind of interviews have you got lined up for the website?
Well, we've got a really nice piece with Catherine Kellogg, who's the founder of GoingZeroWaste.com. That'll be up just about the time that this podcast is released as well. Catherine started her site a few years ago when she had a health crisis and started exploring alternatives to personal care products is where she began. But she's done a great job of collecting ideas and has written a book about going zero waste. So we wanted to talk to her, and we encourage you to take a listen. She's a charming person and has a great mission.
Great. That sounds really good. I'll listen to that. So let's move on to talking about the Green New Deal. Talk about this has been going on since about the end of 2018, somewhat before that. And we're finally starting to see some details about what the sponsors have in mind. And I'd say, first keep in mind what we're talking about right now is 2 resolutions. one in the United States House of Representatives, one in the United States Senate, so both houses of Congress. Each resolution has a sponsor, and these resolutions are kind of sweeping aspirational documents to deal with some of the aspects of climate change and trying to jumpstart this country into a greener economy and a greener way of life. But let's break it down a little bit. So right now, there's I would say a lot of confusion over what it is, what the status is, and what the details are.
Well, I think that's
right.
Yeah, you're making a great point about this, the details. And just to start off, this is sweeping. We do need some big ideas in this country and around the world about how to deal with climate change. I think we can all stipulate that if we were to invent new technologies and new industries, there will be jobs created. And one of the big components of the progressive aspect of this bill, which could have been a Republican bill 40 years ago, is that it proposes providing a universal basic income, or as it's also been described, guaranteeing a job. And those are interesting political elements to what may come out of a green economy. But we want to focus on the green economy elements of this when talking about it, because it's my opinion, and this is neither an endorsement nor a condemnation of the plan, is that it's so big that it can't pass in this form it's in. Does anybody in the group disagree with the fact that this is going to be very challenging to pass in the first place? And so maybe we ought to take it apart and look at some of the good ideas in it while letting some of the other things go at this point.
I agree with that. I think that, and so for those of you who haven't had a chance to dig in, there's some good newspaper articles out on it, and take a look at those. But what this is it's a plan that has aspects dealing with the nation's power structure, efficiencies, all kinds of things that go into the green side, but then also has some significant, what I would call progressive policies, such as jobs guarantees, basic income, and universal health care. And I think today what we're going to do is talk more about the things that are directly related to the environment. And we'll see what happens with the entire package. But I agree with you. I think adding in all of these extra sort of this wish list of progressive policies is going to make this a very cumbersome document to work with. And I think it's going to cause a lot of people who would support it to sort of pull back and hesitate.
I think go ahead.
About it is that it's going to energize people, and especially given that we have some important elections coming up, just getting people caring about an issue like this could increase voter turnout, which is something that we definitely need here in the United States.
I think also, too, just the scale of the problem is so immense. It'd be like someone who is an extreme alcoholic drinking, a case or two of beer a day. Like, we can't just say, we'll just drink one less beer a day. Like, let's just cut our emissions a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, the scale of the issue is so big that it is going to require some really sweeping major changes. So what I find inspiring about this is what Evelyn is saying, is how it identifies, a variety of different industries and a variety of different approaches. And I think that's the kind of thing that we need, although some of the progressive policies might make it lose some support.
So let's start by, I had outlined some of the things that it seems to do. And the first that I have on my list was the plan is that within 10 years, so assuming between 2020 and 2030, we would get to the point where the U.S. was generating 100% of the nation's power from renewable resources. So this is a huge move away from coal generating power and into new sectors.
And that's going to require a change in the grid as well as the sources of energy production. And that's another big element of the bill, or the bills, is the idea of building a distributed smart grid, which will also bring power generation closer to the edge of the network, that is at our homes, so that could provide greater overall stability of the power grid as demand shifts throughout the day. And that's one of the big things we waste power on right now, is being prepared for bursts of use from a central location as compared to producing it at the edges almost as it's needed. So there's some really interesting details of the technology in this proposal that you don't capture in the kind of moment that, like John Kennedy did when he said, let's put a man on the moon in 10 years. And in fact, we did it in 9. So we're looking at this like it is one of those Kennedy-esque statements. On the other hand, just like the space program turned into numerous new industries we would never have anticipated, there are a lot of things in this bill that, when you break them down, do turn out to be excellent economic investments for the society as a whole, and could change the way that we move around, the way that and what we choose to eat and when. One of the criticisms, and this comes from the White House, is that we're going to ban planes and cows and all these other things. And that is not necessarily what they're saying. But what we're talking about is a change in the way we source protein, the way that we power airplanes. It also, one of the things that's not particularly well articulated in this is the idea of pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. We have technology that could do that and help us actually offset the carbon we continue to produce. So another element of this may not be total zero, net zero carbon. It could even be net negative carbon, but with technologies that are removing carbon in addition to reducing the carbon we're putting into the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. You know, what I appreciate about this is the 10-year piece. And I'll tell you on a local level, we have in Tacoma a plant being built down at our waterfront to turn out liquefied natural gas. So you would pump in through pipeline natural gas, and then it gets in this giant tank that cools it down to extraordinarily cold levels, and that the gas liquefies, and then it can be used as a marine fuel, or you can possibly transport it to other countries. And one of the reasons for doing this, the justification is they estimate that it'll take 25 years to get actual clean shipping fuel. And they're thinking, hydrogen or something else. And so don't worry about the fact that we're building a new fossil fuel structure because it'll only be good for 25 years, and then we'll have cleaner things. And I think what this plan does is to say, hang on a second, 25 years is too long.
Yeah.
Don't think you've got this interim period where you can just do business as usual, assuming that at some point you'll have a better solution. You must focus on better solutions today.
Yeah, and the excuse that we need to build an interim fossil fuel system that's more efficient is the basis of an argument 10 years from now that we put so much money into this, we can't afford to shut it down. And Absolutely. That's not where we need to be thinking right now. We need to be thinking about completely new approaches to this. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from what we've done with fossil fuel, and one of them is that more fossil fuel is not the answer to the question.
Yeah. I think policy can really drive innovation too. Like, I think in the past we've approached it more like once we have the solutions, then we can implement them. But I think to really drive innovation, we need to be more constrained. Like, there aren't very many economic factors that really take the environment into full account, like a carbon tax.
Do you think that the LEED building standards, which is referred to in the bill, is a big opportunity for making that change, Sarah? Because I know you spent a lot of time on building materials and building processes.
I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. In the past, I know that LEED has been criticized for not having a lot of tangible measures for energy efficiency, and that some buildings that were built to LEED standards didn't perform as expected. Like the passive house standard, although it tends to be more on a residential basis, that is a very rigorous standard, and there are very specific criteria that impact energy use. So I think it's certainly a step in the right direction. And I think some of the things that people, at least in the past, have gotten points for, like having a shower for employees to encourage bike commuting, like the shower might not actually get used. So I think I think there are certain aspects of LEED that are very strong, and then there are others that are kind of fuzzy when it comes to really looking at key performance indicators.
Well, and if we discuss those kinds of standards and also create a flexible enough regime that places could go without a shower if they determine they're not going to be used, that's the kind of improvement that will generate more opportunity for people to work in changing their environment, the work environment, to be more ecologically sustainable. Now, one of the things that we've talked about on the show, and there's another news story that I want to bring up in relation to this, is the idea of a reverse logistics system to start to capture all the packaging materials and everything all the consumer waste that we generate and put it back into the system as the raw materials of the next generation of stuff we use. And the story I'm referring to is Loop. Was announced by TerraCycle, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and about a dozen other companies, where you get a box. They equate it to a milk box, but basically they drop by a box full of household products, and you throw the waste back into the box for later pickup. Now, when you dig into that, it's an incredibly great idea. It's something we need to do. But the idea of actually doing that across all homes at scale in the United States over the course of the next 10 years is a little daunting, especially when you consider how frequently you'd have to stop and pick up a box that had contained diapers and that now contain used diapers. And that's one of the examples they use in the announcement. It's very different. You use up a box of diapers and they get unpleasant to be around within a week. Whereas if you bought a tube of toothpaste, that tube of toothpaste isn't going to go back at the same time as the box of diapers. So now we're talking about multiple boxes going back to the producers rather than one box. And it's much more complicated than the announcement anticipates. And I expect there'll be a lot of challenges for them as they continue to develop this. But it's another area where if we put people to work cleaning up, we create a lot of opportunity for people to participate in this economically. And once they're economically involved, they can be politically involved too, with greater energy. So what do you guys all think about Loop? I know this is something that everyone in the sustainability community has been talking about. And how do you see something like that fitting into a bigger picture of a green future as compared to a New Deal?
The trick for me is I think a lot of the consumers out there don't realize how much of the price of a product is actually packaging. So if a company like Loop is charging you more money to provide that take back of the service, you're actually, it balances out because the price of packaging that goes into the cost that you're paying is something we don't really consider when we're buying things.
Right. So do you think that awareness will help people think about the fact that they're not, well, let me put it this way. We know that a lot of consumers are willing to pay a premium for something that is sustainable, and that can range from 5 to 15% for the majority of people, and then there's others who will pay much more. Something like Loop, where I can say, I'm going to be paying not only for the products I use, but for their responsible disposal, is a big step in the right direction. Are there enough people out there to embrace it now, to drive it to continued growth, which will involve a lot of experimentation?
See, what I'm not sure about is when I hear those studies about when people are willing to pay more for sustainable goods, I'm wondering if they're talking about the actual product itself or the packaging, because there are things like organic and farm fresh and low VOCs, those type of things where the actual product is green. The packaging, I don't know if that's something that the consumers have thought about as much.
Yeah, well, good point. And so teasing those two things apart or treating them as one large problem, which is really where Loop is going. They said, don't worry about the recycling part of this. We'll take care of it. Which way makes more sense? I agree. Most people want green, sustainable products and services, and particularly food that's non-toxic. But how do we take something like the Green New Deal, the idea of massive investment in new economic infrastructure, and combine it with what we already know drives the consumer economy, which is convenience? And Loop did it by saying, don't worry about the recycling. We'll take care of it. Are there more projects and experiments like that we need to see? Do we need to all put a lot of effort into helping Loop succeed? I think that's one good thing. But what about you guys? What do you think, Sarah or Evelyn?
I think a lot of times decisions in stores are made kind of impulsively. So I think a lot of these studies show that people will pay more, and we see it certainly, for example, with organic produce. But I think people don't tend to be as compulsive in shopping for produce, or impulsive rather, as they are with other purchases such as electronics or clothing or things like that. And so I think what's difficult though is that there's a lot of external costs that consumers aren't paying, and a lot of that falls down on, waste disposal or carbon emissions or things like that aren't being calculated into the product cost. So I think if those external costs weren't incorporated into the cost of an item, then I think it would also change the pricing of things quite a bit. Because it's almost like more green or conscious consumers are almost being penalized for those beliefs.
I think that's true. I think that's sort of a calculation of who are the people who are buying, let's say, the organic or the artisan items, and what is their price point? What is their willingness to pay a bit more for these items? And I think that there is that willingness, and I think that willingness has been exploited, sometimes because the items cost more to produce, sometimes because that's just what the market will bear. And I think that's going to be the same with Loop or groups like that are offering that sort of home service of, we will pick up your goods or we will provide goods to you. And I think it's going to work. And I'll tell you why. For two reasons. One, Amazon. The younger people I know get a significant amount of their regular marketing done online. I mean, it's just the routine. My practice has tended to be, because I'm a little older, that I will go to the store and look for the thing I'm looking for. If I cannot find it, I tend to then go to Amazon rather than, continue to look around town, drive around town. I will go to Amazon. But, other people do not do that. They go straight to Amazon. It's very successful and very satisfying. So I think that orientation away from going to a market is very helpful. The second thing is, we are starting to see in Tacoma. So I have bragged about Tacoma's recycling center and environmental services program since we began this program. Well, let me tell you, they just launched a survey this week saying we may need to end curbside recycling. Would you rather we end curbside and beef up our our recycling centers, or would you be willing to pay more? Would you be willing to pay $2 more a month and you get X, $4 more a month and you get sort of the full curbside plus some other benefits? And I have to think that, Tacoma has done really well with its recycling. After this coming, any city that does curbside is going to look at making changes because of the changing recycling economy. And because of that, I think a lot of people who have been heavy recyclers are going to be looking around thinking, what other options do I have if my curbside goes away?
Well, and so here we come back to the Green New Deal. One of the things that's not in the Green New Deal is the idea of incenting a reverse logistics infrastructure to capture all this material. And that, we subsidize the fossil fuel industry to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. If we took $2 billion of that and put it into subsidies for companies that start to respond to the waste they're creating in the home by collecting it, which in Europe is called a producer responsibility law. Loop is trying it as a commercial service here. Amazon, although Amazon is filling our home with boxes, is not doing a good job of taking all those boxes away or any of the materials in it. They've made some gestures towards improved packaging, but you would actually have to have Amazon acquire the Loop system and then distribute it across the entire Amazon system in order for us to have this at scale. And that actually, I think, is probably what ends up happening here. Not necessarily, maybe Walmart does it instead of Amazon, but somebody buys this and starts to focus on capturing back. Then it's real clear, as you were saying, with the survey about whether or not you'd pay a couple bucks extra for curbside. where the money is being spent, and you can start to direct it through some forms of public policy. We're going to give tax breaks to reverse or circular economy companies. We're not going to give tax breaks to companies that leave a lot of trash in the home. And that's the basis. That's the discussion that the Green New Deal, at least the economic parts of it, I think is prepared to catalyze. And then we need to begin to articulate this, and hopefully this is what we do at Earth911, how those choices play out in our lives so that it can be convenient and easy for us to be better for the planet, while simultaneously thinking about a lot of new ideas that we just wouldn't have considered before because they've been put on the table by an initiative like this.
Well, one of the things we haven't talked about that's outlined in the Green New Deal is we talked a little bit eliminating carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions, particularly from the transportation sector and industry. And this is where there's been some focus on beefing up the internal U.S. transportation. So in this case, I think they were hoping high-speed rail so that there would be less requirement to rely on airplanes to get across the country. And I know, Trey, you've done a lot of work and has done a lot of looking about transportation and emissions. What are your thoughts on that?
So I think the thing that people don't necessarily realize when we're talking about climate change, the biggest contributor to our carbon output, at least in the United States, is transportation. It's not factory emissions. Mm-hmm. It's not fossil fuels. It's us getting in our cars every day and driving wherever we want to go. So whatever happens with this New Deal, if we as consumers want to make a change, we have the most power to make that change by exploring ways to stop driving our cars as much. The big thing is when we're talking about the increase in infrastructure in light rail and high-speed rail, the public has to buy into it. And I've said on these podcasts before, I think there's a stigma out there to public transportation. There's, in America, this idea that you have a certain level of status if you own your own car and you can drive yourself places, hopefully with ride sharing and elements like that, that's starting to disappear. But until we as Americans buy into the idea that we need to stop utilizing our cars, driving one person from place to place, we're not going to be able to address this topic regardless of what the Green New Deal accomplishes.
I think one thing, though, that can help and that we can factor in is how much more difficult air travel is now. Like we're restricted in what we can bring on. There's a lot of airlines charge for bags. It's, people often have to remove their shoes and almost feel like it's a violation of their personal privacy. It takes quite a bit of time. Like I've spent 2 hours in security lines in O'Hare Airport before. So I think that if there's an option that could be more attractive, if I could just hop on a train and get to New York City in a few hours instead of flying there in what would also take a few hours counting the check-in, I think that could be a really big step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think the two factors that are going to implement or they're going to factor into what sort of buy-in there is going to be cost and safety. So will it be less expensive for you to ride a light rail or a high-speed train from New York to Boston than it would be to fly? And also, obviously we have car seats and elements for our kids to make it so that it's safer for them if they're in a car driving somewhere. How are we going to make it so that it's the safest way for us to travel as well as the greenest way?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking primarily about moving people around, but it's moving stuff around that adds much of that carbon to the atmosphere. And, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who was a county commissioner in rural Colorado, and he was saying that they had to spend $250,000 on a glass crusher so that they could crush the glass that they gather at their recycling program and ship it out of the area. So hundreds of miles to send it somewhere else. And what do they need, strangely, in this town in rural Colorado, is gravel. And so they import roughly the same amount of gravel. And that's simply the fact that two different materials are in different places than they need to be. And thinking about the infrastructure is also about thinking about how to build hubs where we can have shared resources like a glass crusher, or how do we think about distributing gravel to cities that need it? And I know these sound really mundane, but these are the problems that on a day-to-day basis government and companies are dealing with in terms of how to make and distribute products and services in an economically efficient way. And we need to rethink all of that, starting with the way that we travel. And Sarah's point about how difficult air travel has become is well taken, because that's just a different form of regulation. It's a regulation on our freedom to travel with or without our shoes on. And what we're talking about with a 10-year plan is how do we rethink when we need to travel and when we need to ship stuff. And one of the things we've done with these buyer's guides that we've introduced, like the mattress and sustainable pillow buyer guide, is look at the supply chain, how far stuff has to be moved in order to make the product. And we found that only one company takes all of that into account and then buys carbon credits to offset that additional carbon involved in transportation. That kind of forward-looking, comprehensive or holistic view of the process of making and delivering stuff is what we really need to re-examine. And it's a great conversation for us to be starting and continuing over the course of the next few years.
Mm-hmm. And some companies have formed consortiums where they, for example, will source raw materials together, and then they have more influence with suppliers as far as the sustainability of it, or where a waste product for one company could be a feedstock for another. So I think collaboration among companies is also really crucial too.
Well, and that extends to consumers. Consumers can recognize which companies are making these kinds of investments that do create the green or sustainable outcome that they're looking for in a product, and then decide to spend to support it. That doesn't mean they have to subsidize it, but they do want to commit to being supportive of it. And we need a way for consumers to find and organize around the systems that they want to see delivering things to their homes. So, the Green New Deal, to me, represents a stake in the ground. It's a very large stake with a lot of controversial edges, but we'll start to carve it down to the things that are going to make the biggest difference. And that is the one human quality that has seemed to have gotten us through all of this, is that we generally ultimately find the simplest solution that we can. And those solutions become less simple as we know more about the world. We would not have recognized global warming with the technology we had 100 years ago, although a few people predicted it. But now we have to face up to it. Not only could we measure it before we felt it, now we feel it, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show. So this is an incredibly important discussion, and one that we shouldn't turn into an argument about cow farts and welfare.
Yeah. But, I'll tell you something about the welfare piece. So, and I should be clear, one of the aspects of the Green New Deal, and probably the one that a lot of negative attention is focused on, is the idea that it would also provide a federal jobs guarantee, basic income, and universal health care. But let me rework that. So whenever you have a state-sponsored or federally sponsored building program, highways, trains, whatever they be, those programs pay what's called prevailing wage, which is the highest wage in a 3-county area. They tend to go to larger companies. They tend to go to union construction companies, and those are really good, really well-paid jobs. So that naturally creates some excellent jobs. If there is an increase in funding for research and development, those are excellent jobs. As you mentioned, Mitch, those will also have spin-offs into new industries that will create new jobs, probably high-paying jobs.
Also blue-collar jobs.
Right.
We're talking moving stuff, too.
Right, exactly. So all of these things, including things like tax policy, I can't tell you the number of people who have sort of been a little bit hesitant now about either electric cars or solar on their homes because they're not sure of the tax credits that previously were available. So all of these things incentivize people to do things. Money helps, and money from the federal government is always helping to make things circulate. So I think even without the specific progressive policies on setting up new job systems and setting up other things that are going to require, frankly, a really significant bureaucratic. I think a lot of positives come from just being able to funnel attention, funnel energy, and get people excited about doing some things, some real hands-on things in a short period of time.
I think it's a double-edged sword, though, because if you look at the states, if you go to a micro level, instead of focusing on the U.S. as a whole, look at the states that have been more progressive in environmental policy, your Californias, your New Yorks. They've achieved a lot of great things, but they've also had to raise their cost of living considerably to fund those programs. So if we're talking about this implemented on a national level, are we going to price the United States out of the cost of living for many people out there?
I don't know that that's going to be the long-term problem, because we're going to find the price that people are willing to pay. The debate is who gets to keep the most money. And that's something that actually, and I'm going to recommend a book. It's called Utopia for Realists by Rutger Bregman, who's a Dutch philosopher and thinker. He points out that the Nixon administration actually embraced the idea of a universal basic income back in 1970, and that Milton Friedman, of all people, decided and argued to Nixon that there was a legal entitlement to an income. And he talked about the fact that we had nevertheless managed to stigmatize that idea even then. So there were experiments done back then, which Bregman's book goes into, and earlier experiments that show that this actually does net out to a positive for society, because people take the opportunity they have and invest in themselves that they don't get when they don't have the income. So thinking about this as a purely ideological problem and recognizing that this ideology that is being attributed to the left existed on the right 50 years ago is important to keep in mind. Let's not get distracted by the politics of who's right and wrong or who wins an election. Let's focus on the data and on the programs that we know can make a change and measure them and hold people accountable. That's the function of government, is to hold the people and particularly companies accountable because they have so much power. And we're in the midst of a massive renegotiation. To your point, Trey, how that negotiation works out for everyone has to do with what they contribute to society. And right now there's a sense that there is not an equitable contribution to society by some people, and that some people differs depending on which part of the ideological spectrum you're on. But we all have to live through this, and that's what we need to focus on as we talk about the green future.
And like you said, Mitch, there's so many subsidies that support the fossil fuel industry, and so to kind of redistribute some of those and
and the chicken industry, meat industry, all sorts of industries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to begin to redistribute those strategically, taking, say, local economies into account and carbon emissions and all those things could really radically redistribute how our financial system is operating.
And we have the tools to do that. The difference between when I started working as a writer and reporter back in the 80s and today was you had to get thousands of pages of federal documents to find out what was going on in the web, and it took forever to read them. Now you can have something watch for those changes, and we can measure things in detail that we never did before. Putting those things together, making it available for easy consumption by the public and by companies, and helping to encourage that innovation is another major function of the government in society. And so there are lots of ways that we can do this without turning this into a left-right discussion and that focus purely on the fact that we're making improvements to our sustainability, to the efficiency of the economy. And these are things that almost no one can argue with in terms of the reality and importance of the outcomes. Whether you're trading stocks on Wall Street or whether you're trying to make your house payments at home, you're still looking for the most you can get for your money. And the traders are looking for the best profit in return for the investment they put in. We know sustainable companies perform 10 to 15% better overall over the long term. They've outperformed non-sustainable companies during the downturn of the last 6 months, where most of the market's down 4.5%. The sustainable index is down only about 3.2. So lots and lots of information that we really never had access to before makes it possible to have new discussions about how subsidies are allocated, where subsidies are allocated. They don't have to be treated as one big national program, but something that could be applied on a state-by-state or region-by-region basis. So a lot of opportunity for change. And I just hope that people don't focus on they're trying to ban planes, cows, trains, and steaks. It's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a future in which everything is sourced in new and more efficient ways.
And I hope the thing people also focus on is they put in the bill, the text for the bill, the idea that the amount of money we lose based on climate change from our economy because of wildfires and natural disasters that are climate related. I mean, we've had some pretty significant cities like New Orleans just devastated by natural disasters that we then as a country have to pay to build back up. That's things I don't think a lot of people think about.
I was just thinking about making that point, Trey. I'm glad you brought that up, but just how it disproportionately impacts people with lower incomes. You know, they have less means to evacuate, or maybe they didn't have insurance on their home, so they can't rebuild it. So it does become even a class issue too.
Yeah, and look at Tacoma, Washington, or the whole Pacific Northwest. We had a snowstorm, and no one I know has been to their office in the last 6 days. That's billions of dollars in lost productivity, and it's due to weather. So they're recognizing all of this and recognizing how it does disproportionately affect other people, different people, and putting programs in place to help is the opportunity we have. We shouldn't turn away from it. We should turn and look directly at this challenge. And I think in that sense, the Green New Deal does a real service.
So that's a good transition point. We'll keep watching. And, as things emerge, we can talk about it further. But at this point, let's talk about our Earthling questions. We have a couple of interesting ones. The first one is from Garrett in Pittsburgh. And Garrett would like to know something about the beeswax, which is not easy to say. So he says, how does the beeswax carbon footprint compare to plastic wrap's carbon footprint? How much plastic waste does one beeswax wrap displace? Looking at life cycle analysis, is beeswax wrap, and I think he did this just because it's so hard to say, is beeswax wrap truly better than plastic wrap? When accounting for land use, does beeswax wrap still prevail?
I think Garrett is laying down an interesting challenge, and it goes to some of the measurement we were talking about before. In my opinion, the beeswax wraps are a more efficient way to go because and land use is not actually the relevant criteria because beeswax is a byproduct of a large amount of land in cultivation, for instance. So it's not like we're paying specifically for the location and using it to create beeswax. On the other hand, how much does one beeswax wrap displace in plastic film? And if anybody has a different experience, I find you can use these things dozens of times. So it replaces at least a half a roll, if not a roll of plastic. That's a winner to me.
Yeah, I agree. We have a couple of these, and I will say they're not ideal for everything. So you do have to have some other options, but and I do have some plastic wrap too. But I would say a good sheet of the beeswax wrap could definitely replace half a roll to a full roll of cling film.
And so, without doing the calculation, Garrett, we think that it's a better green deal.
Well, and remember, too, when the beeswax wrap does finally, what happens is they will eventually get so soft the wax is basically gone from them. Well, then you're left with a piece of cloth. So a piece of cloth certainly decomposes in a different way than a sheet of plastic wrap.
Absolutely.
So Deb on Facebook asks, she says, I'm looking for a place within a 50-mile radius of my zip code that will accept glass bottles, as in wine bottles and beer bottles. And she checked on a number of places, but said a lot of them no longer accept bottles.
Well, Trey, this is the glass is not as valuable as it used to be problem. What would you suggest that Deb do when faced with the opportunity to either throw away or reuse glass bottles like wine bottles and beer bottles?
Definitely reuse would be a great option. There's a lot of great DIY projects you can do with your glass. But yeah, it's a situation where even though glass is part of what we call the big five in recycling, it's going to be the least monetizable of all. So it wouldn't surprise me if curbside programs are not accepting it in certain areas.
Well, and we've heard Tacoma's even considering whether we have a curbside program. But my thought on this, because it's a very specific kind of glass, wine bottles and beer bottles, is that Deb should give a call to a local home brewing organization. There's at least one in every town, or a winemaking group in every town. There are also stores that may be interested, not necessarily in buying the material, but taking the material and providing it to winemakers or beer makers for their use. So there are certainly reuse opportunities where you can connect what you have to somebody else's passion, and that could be a really nice thing to do.
I think so too. So our last question is from Becky, who asked us on Facebook, hey, do you guys have any tips on how an individual can calculate their energy usage and carbon emissions?
Well, strangely enough, we actually have a story coming out just right before this podcast goes live, providing a list of and some rankings of carbon footprint calculators. And the one that we found that we liked the best, and this is based on its ability to visualize the information in a very practical way, is the carbonfootprint.com calculator. But there's also the British World Wildlife Fund has a great calculator that you can use. It's in metric. And Cool Climate Network at the University of California, Berkeley has a nice calculator as well. But there are a dozen, and we list many of them in the articles. So check it out. It's up on the site as we speak.
Great. Excellent. Well, I think that's all we have for this week. Anything else before we sign off?
Please, snow, melt.
Okay. Make the snow melt, a little warmer weather. Okay. Well, that's it for this episode. As always, we appreciate your suggestions and feedback. And in particular, since we've been talking about the Green New Deal, if you have thoughts on that or questions, send them our way. It's a good excuse for us to look into this a little bit deeper, too. So you can, get on our website, Earth911.com, and join the forums, or send us an email at feedback@Earth911.com, and you can listen to us at all of your usual podcast providers, or tune in at our website, Earth911.com. And we will see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.